What's up Laravel developers, it's Dari here and I hope that you're having a great day. Now that we just finished the Laravel API course, I thought it might be good to dive into authentication and mailing in Laravel. This is a pretty big step forward if you think about the projects that you can build in Laravel. If we take an e-commerce as an example, you offer products to the customer and let's say that they can also subscribe to your newsletter. If they want to order a product, they need to be authenticated since you need their personal information. And if you want to send them a notification or an email of their order, you obviously need mailing. Now before I continue on with the video, I want to quickly let you know that you can support the channel through Patreon, which is linked in the description down below. You get pretty cool benefits such as a private Discord group where everyone is helping each other out, and you can decide the next video series that I'm going to make through the polls. So if you're interested to join, the link is down in the description. When I created my Laravel for Beginners series, which is also linked in the description down below, I added a chapter at the end of the course about authentication and authorization, not knowing that you could make an entire course about it. I want to cut all the small talk and introduction videos and how to set up a project, and I actually want to dive right into the code. Now I have a folder on my desktop where I store my Laravel projects called Workspace. But I also created a shortcut command called cdw, which will change directories to the workspace. So let's hit enter. Now we're inside my workspace, as you can see right here. And I obviously need a new Laravel project. So let's write down Laravel, new, auth app. Let's hit enter. And this might take a second, so pause the video and I'll see you back in a second. The folder has been created, so let's change directories inside our project. So cd auth app, hit enter. Inside our auth app, we need to add Laravel's UI through Composer. So let's perform Composer require Laravel /UI space --dev. Hit enter. Alright, this was pretty fast. For this course, we obviously need to pull in the authentication scaffolding. So let's perform php artisan UI view space --auth. Hit enter. And it's asking us to run npm install and npm run dev. So let's copy it. Paste it. Hit enter. And this will probably run into an error of Laravel mix. Let's perform npm audit fix --force. And now let's run npm run watch. And as you can see, it's compiling as well. So we just fixed that. Now before I dive into my project, I want to show you which versions I'm using for this project. As you can see, we run npm run watch, so we need to open a new tab. I can do that by pressing Ctrl or Command T. Let me zoom in. cdw again. cd into auth app. And in here, let's perform php artisan space --version. And as you can see, I'm using Laravel's framework of 8.38.0. To be honest, the versions from 8.0 until this one won't make a big difference. The issue comes into play if you're using older versions such as Laravel 5 or 6. Now to also check out our npm version, let's write down npm space -v. And as you can see, the npm version is 6.14.11. Whether you got experience in a different programming language than PHP or Laravel, you probably know that creating an application with login and register sessions, password resets, remember me access permissions can be, well, pretty time consuming. And one of the reasons I started using Laravel is honestly to save myself some time when working on projects. So right now, it's finally time to dive into our code editor. So let's open Visual Studio Code and let's open our workspace as well. I need to drag down my Visual Studio Code. Alright, so in our workspace, let's drag auth app into the code editor. Let's close off the folder because we don't need it. Let's make it bigger and let's also zoom in. Let's close off the welcome screen. Now, using a framework like Laravel can also have its downsides. And yes, it does. And it's even coming from me. Since everything is so easy to go and the documentation on Laravel is very good, most people completely forget how the flow works. And that's what I want to show you in this video. Every Laravel project comes with its own user stable, migration, and user model, which you probably have seen when you migrated your fresh project for the first time. So let me show that to you. If we open database, there's a folder called migrations. And let me make this a little bit bigger. You can see that we have 3 migrations to create user stable, create password resets, and create file jobs. Now the one that we need is the first one, so to create users table. Let me make it smaller again. And IntelliSense updated to, well, let's say dismiss. All right, let me scroll down. Right here, you can see that a user has a unique ID, name, email, and an email verified at, which is a timestamp. A string, so for the password, the remember token, and the timestamps. Now, whenever you migrate this file, it will be used with the user model. So let's open that one right now. Let's open app, models, user.php. Looking at this file, you usually won't touch it a lot. You can see that the namespace is obviously app/models. It has some use statements, as you can see right here. It has a class name. It has 2 use statements inside the class, which I will cover in a bit. And it has 2 properties. The first one is called fillable, and the second one is called hidden. Whenever you're using the fillable property, you're basically telling the application, well, whenever you want to create a new user, at least the name, email, and the password needs to be filled in. And for the password and remember token, exclude them because they don't need to be shown to the user. And honestly, that's right, isn't it? Why would you want to get one of those values and print them out for a developer? There's actually not a legitimate reason for it. Probably to see if your password is encrypted, but that could also be done through MySQL. There's a property called cast, which will cast the email verified at to the date time. I skipped the most important word right here. Well, actually the most important words. So let's go at the top. And as you can see, our class user extends the authenticatable. So I'm on a Mac and I have PHP IntelliSense installed, which allows me to click through on a word. The way you do that is by clicking on Alt and clicking on the word that you want to click through. Now in our case, it's authenticatable. So let's do that. In here, you can see the entire path. So it's in the vendor directory, folder called Laravel, and so on until the file user.php. You can see that the class extends the model, which is the default model, and it also implements 3 other files. The first one is the authenticatable contract, and this is something which is called a contract, as the name implies. This will require methods that will then allow the framework to authenticate instances of this model to the auth system. We have the authorizable contract, and if you have used Laravel before, you know that there's a can method which will allow the framework to authorize instances of this model for their access permissions in different contracts. The last one is the can reset password contract, which will basically allow you to reset the password of any entity. Whenever you pull in the authentication scaffolding, you also pull in some controllers. So let's go at the top of our page, open HTTP, controllers, the auth folder. Now to show you this example or the controllers, we need to go back to the terminal and in here perform php artisan serve. And the reason why I'm doing this is so I can show you the files that we're working with. Now as you can see, it generated a URL for us, so let's copy it. Let's open a new tab for the browser. Let's paste it in. And let me zoom in a little bit. All right. Now let's hop back to the CLI one more time because I want to show you all the routes that we got. And in order to do that, we need to open a new tab again. I need to zoom in and let's go to the right folder. All right. And in here, let's perform php artisan route list. And let me zoom out for this one. Whenever you pull in the authentication scaffolding, you will see a total of 14 routes right here. And almost all of them are related to the authentication scaffolding. Now a cool thing is that the authentication scaffolding will automatically pull in a home controller. So let me show that to you. Right here, it has a home controller in the controllers folder. And as you can see inside our URI, we have a home page, which will go to the home controller and it searches for a method called index. Besides that, we have a login screen, show the login form. And something that might be weird for you is that we basically have 2 login forms. So the get head and the post. The get method is basically to show the page and the post method is to submit the form. We have a logout page, the password confirm, the password email reset, and the register page. Now one thing that you might have seen is that all these files that you can see right here, go through the auth folder. So every single page right here is using the auth folder. And this is actually the reason why I showed you the routes, since that's the first place we need to look. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. In here, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 controllers that are related to authentication. I want to go over these controllers in a logical order. So whenever you start a new application, you need to register first. So let's open that one. So the register controller. What I want to do is to actually register an account and show you the different things that happen inside the controller. But before we do that, we need to set up our database. So let's open our .env file. Let me close off the vendor. I need to change my host to localhost. The port is alright, the database is alright, and I am using a password of Dari1234. Save it and close off the file. Let's open the register controller again. Let's go to MySQL. Now what we actually could do is to open a new tab and write down, well, zoom in, write down MySQL. We need to create a new database, so let's perform create database auth app. And hit enter, and you can see that one row has been added. Now let's go back to the previous tab that we had. In here we need to run php artisan migrate. And let me zoom in as well. Right now we are ready to continue on with our controller. I won't be going over the use statements, namespaces and class because it's pretty straightforward. It's something that you already need to know. But the one thing that I skipped inside the model was the use statements. Now these look like a use statement, but they are actually called different. These use statements inside a controller class are called traits, and this trait will be called when the controller is being called. Now if we scroll down, you can see that we have a property right here called redirected to. And this is actually pretty important. To showcase what this does, I want to go to the browser, click on register inside the top right corner, create a new account. So let's say code with Dari, password is info, password is something secret. All right, if we click on register right here, you can see that the register process went pretty fine, but we have been redirected to /home. And this is being done inside the redirected to property of the controller. As you can see, it's calling the route service provider, : home. What is : home? If we press on Alt and click on route service provider, scroll down, you can basically see a constant here called home. And this is going to an endpoint of /home. And if we double check it inside the browser, you can see that our endpoint is /home. Obviously, we can easily create a new endpoint. So let's do that. Let's go right below our constant home, create a public constant test, and let's set it equal to /test. Save it, go back to our register controller, and let's replace home with the constant that we have called test. Let's save it, let's go back to the browser, let's click on our name, log out, and let's register one more time. Name is test, password is test, add code with Dari. Let's add a password. Click on register. And as you can see, it redirected us to /test, and the status code is a 404 because the page has not been found. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's change it back to : home. And let's continue on. As you can see, our controller is using a constructor. So whenever a user tries to hit the register controller, it will look if a person is logged in or not through the middleware. There is a validator and a create method. The validator method will basically define how to validate registrations. So if you like to change some rules, say that you want to change the password minimum characters to, let's say 12, you can easily change it right here. Now the last method is the create method, which will define how to create a new user based on the incoming registration, which is the variable data. Whenever you register, you will log in automatically, just like I showed you a minute ago. But let's see how the login controller works. So let's open it. If we scroll down, you can see that the login controller is using one trait called authenticates users, which will bring in the redirected users. It also has its own property of redirect to, which is heading the home constant, but you can change this one as well. Now there's one method inside the login controller, and that's the constructor. So whenever the login controller is being called, it looks if the guest already exists, so inside the session, and then it will show you the logout button. Now I can go over the confirm password, forgot password, reset password and verification controller, but if you scroll through it, let's just open one. You must have a clear understanding of what is going on right here because it's pretty much the same. It's using crates, it has a redirect, and it has a constructor that might go through the middleware. Now the next step is the routes. So if we scroll down and open the web.php file inside the routes, scroll down, you can see that 3 routes are defined, but I actually want to focus on the auth : routes. Now what this basically does is showing all the endpoints that I just showed you in the CLI. You can obviously define all the routes by yourself, but think about it. If you have a resource for CRUD applications, why would there be a special type of route for all the different views that you have in the controller? It's so easy to just define a resource or a route. Now that I've talked about the controllers, model, routes, and migrations, I think it's time to take it a step further by talking about the authentication scaffolding, since views are a very big part of it. It will take care of the routes inside the views of the resources folder. There's a folder called views, and in here you can see a auth folder. All these files and the layouts folder as well got automatically created when we run the php artisan make auth command. And all these files have a bootstrap based layout and all of the form fields are already correct. Now if we open the login blade file, we obviously have a form where we can log in. And I won't go over all of the stuff that we have right here, but I want to quickly show you something which is pretty important. If we scroll down to the bottom, you can see that we have a label and an input right here. And this is basically the remember me checkbox that we have inside our view. Let me show that to you. Change the endpoints to /login. Oh, we're logged in. Let's log out. Let's click on login. And as you can see right here, we have a remember me checkbox. Now this is pretty much the place where we process the remember me checkbox that you can see in the UI. This remember me function does not work out of the box since you need a long life access token inside your database. So let's go to the CLI. Let's go to the MySQL tab and let's use auth app. Now let's desk the table users. And as you can see right here, we have a remember token column, which can be null. Now if we select everything from the table users, let me zoom out. All right. You can see that the remember token of code with Dari and test are actually both null. And this is happening because I've never clicked on the input field. When you usually log in, you log in without a remember token. But whenever you click on the remember me checkbox, a boolean will be passed as a true to the auth attempt method. So where can we find this method? Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's go to the login controller. And let's click true on authenticates user. Now, if you scroll down, you can see that we have a method somewhere right here called attempt login. You can see that we are going to check if a remember input field has been filled, and this will return a boolean. Now, if we go back to the browser, let's log in with info@darinazar. Let's click on the remember me checkbox, click on login. You can see that we are indeed logged in. And if we go back to the database, select everything from users again, you can see that a long life token has been created for code with Dari. If we close off the browser, open it one more time. Let me make it full screen. And let's go to the right endpoint. You can see that we are indeed logged in because we cannot see the login and register button. Now the next thing that I want to talk about is the auth middleware. And I actually have talked about it before, but not really in depth. A lot of places in our application, let's open Visual Studio Code and let's go to the login controller. Let's go to the constructor. All right. A lot of places in our application, we have been using the middleware. And as you can see, it accepts a string called guest. Now, how does this work? If you want to perform checks to see if a user is logged in or not, you will usually do that through the middleware. Now Laravel uses a route middleware where some very important routes are defined. And these can be found inside the app folder, HTTP, and there's a file called kernel.php. If we scroll down to the bottom, you can see that we have a property called route middleware. And if you look at the names, you can see a couple files that are related to authentication. The first one is obviously auth, and this is used to restrict route access to authenticated users. We have the auth.basic, we have the guest right here, which will restrict access to unauthenticated users. And the last one is the can right above. And this is used for authorizing user access to given routes. Just like any other application, we pretty much concluded that it allows a user to authorize in your application. You can basically have control of what they are allowed to do. In Laravel, you can use gates to determine if a user is authorized to perform a given action. So instead of adding a lot of codes and see through if statements if a user has been set, you can use gates. Now the auth service provider is located inside the app folder. You can find a folder called providers right here. And in here, you can see a file called auth service provider. So let's open it. We need the boot method. Now, whenever you do something inside the boot method, you're basically calling methods on the auth vacate. And before we dive into our gate, we need to add a new column to our table users because we need to check if a user is an admin or not. Now, we obviously don't want to roll back to lose data. So if we go to the CLI, go to the other tab and perform a PHP artisan make me a migration called add is admin _to _users space -- table is users. So we're basically creating a new migration because we want to add a new column to the table users. Hit enter. All right, it's creating the migration. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code, database folder, and it's obviously the last one. And as you can see right here, we have a new table. Well, not a new table, a new migration for the table users. In here, we could basically say table, create me a boolean called isAdmin, and the default value is 0. Now let's save it and close it off. Hop back to the CLI, perform PHP artisan migrate. And as you can see, the add isAdmin to user has been migrated. Now if we go to MySQL, let's perform select everything from the table users. Let me zoom out. You can see that a isAdmin has been added right here, but it's actually pretty small for you. Before we define our gate, we need to have a new page to see if a user is an admin or not. So let's define the route first. Let's go to our home controller. Right below our index method, let's create a public function private method. Let's return a view of private. Save it. Let's create a view. So inside our views folder, create a new file called private.blade.php. And let's create an h1 in here. And let's say private screen if isAdmin has been set to true. Save it, close it off. And the last thing that we need to do is to define a route. So let's go to the web.php file. At the top, let's pull in our home controller. So use app /http /controllers /home controller. Save it. Let's go down. Let's create a new route under the welcome route. Say route : get to /private. Let's pass in a second param of the controller. So home controller : class, comma, single quotes, and search for the method called private. Save it. Let's go back to the browser to test it out. Let's change the endpoint to /private. That was a typo. All right, and as you can see, private screen if isAdmin has been set to true has been printed out. Right now, we are finally ready to talk about our gate. So let's go back to the auth service provider. At the top, let's open it. And inside the boot method, we need to define our first gate. So let's say gate, : define. So we're going to define a new gate. Inside the parentheses of the define method, we need to add some params. Now the first param is the key. And this needs to be a string that makes sense to what you're going to do. We're going to check if a admin is set, and then the admin can only enter that specific page. So in single quotes, let's call it admin-only. Let's add a comma because we have a second param since we need to define the closure. So let's say function, parentheses, curly braces, and let's hit enter. Inside the function that we just created, we need to pass in a param, and it's going to be the object we're going to check for access. So it will be variable user. So given the object that we got, variable user, we can check whether a user is an admin or not. So right inside of our gate, we could basically perform an if statement where we're going to check if the user is admin is equal to 1. Now, like I said, and I'll repeat myself once again, we defined a boolean in our database, so we're going to get back 1 or 0. You can obviously write the logic however you want, but at the moment, let's keep it like this. Now, the closure of our return value needs to be a boolean. Now, if the user is an admin, we want to return true, since the one that we're checking is true. Outside of our if statement, we want to return false because it's not true. If we save it and go back to the browser and refresh it, you can see that it still works, since we still need to do something inside our controller. We need to tell our controller to listen to the gate. So let's do that. Let's go to our home controller. We need to pull in our gate first. So let's say use illuminate / support / vacates / gate. Save it. Let's go down to our private method, because right here we need to check if the gate is allowed. So let's perform an if statement, and inside the if statement we're going to check if gate : allows, which is a method, parentheses. Allows method accepts two params. The first one is the gate name that we have defined in our auth service provider, so admin only. Well, let's copy it, paste it in single quotes. Now the second param is the actual logged in user. And like you probably know, you can grab that with auth, parentheses, access operator, user. If a user is allowed, let's return a view of private. Now make sure that you remove the second return value. If a gate is not allowed, we need to return something as well. And what I want to return is a abort 403. If we save it and refresh the page, you can see that we're being hit with a 403. And this is happening because we haven't set the isAdmin inside our database. So let's change that. Let's go to iterm. Let's say update users set isAdmin equal to 1, where ID is equal to 1. So code with Dari has ID number 1. Hit enter. Let me zoom out. Let's select everything from users again. And as you can see, the isAdmin boolean has been set to 1. Now let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh the page. And as you could see, we are allowed to see this page. Next to the allow method that I just showed you inside our controller, we could also perform a denies method. So let's replace it. We will check if the gate denies admin-only. Save it, go back to the browser, refresh it, and well, we have been hit with a 403 because it's not being denied, but it's allowing us. The denies method is pretty much the same as saying gate : allows, but adding an exclamation mark right in front of it, so it's not true. Save it, refresh the page, and it's still a 403. This example was pretty simple, but this should open a lot of opportunities for you guys if you want to create an application with multiple roles. What I recommend is creating something like an enum that will interact with different roles like admin, creator, user, and so on. One of the most important ones in my opinion is mailing in Laravel. In web-based applications, sending an email or notification is a very common requirement. And to be honest, this can be done in multiple ways. There are loads of mail functionality layers that you can build on top of the default layer functionality, which is the Swift mailer. In order to see your mail configuration, you need to go to the config folder, and in here you can see a file called mail.php. So let's open it. If you want to send actual emails to clients or customers, you need something which is called a mail driver. And if we scroll down, you can find all the drivers that come with Laravel for mailing. We have SMTP, SES, Mailgun, Postmark, SendMail, Log, and Array. Now, one thing that all of these drivers have in common is that a lot of variables are being called from the env file. Since Laravel 5.3, a new mailable syntax has been developed. Before this ever came out, there was a classic mailing system which was very easy to use. But for the purpose of this video, and to not make it longer than it should be, I'm going to focus on the mailable. Now, the goal is to create a specific PHP class that will represent a mail. And this needs to be generated in the CLI. So let's go to the CLI. Now, before I show you how we could actually generate a mail, let's write down PHP artisan help make mail. You can see the usage of the mail function. So whenever you try to perform a make mail command, you need to pass in one argument, which is the name. So the name of the class that you want to create. You can see that there are a couple options. You probably won't need most of them except for the markdown, but we will cover it in a bit. What we want to do is to create a new mailable class. So let's say PHP artisan make mail called welcome mail. If we hit enter, you can see that a mail has been created successfully. And if we go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that a new file has been created, or a new folder called mail. So let's open it, and it's right inside of the app folder. So let's open welcome mail.php. If we look at the class, right, you can probably see a class that looks familiar to you. It imports two traits. The first one is queuable, and that's used in order to queue your email. And the second one is serializes model. And this is used so that every eloquent model will be serialized correctly. You could also find a constructor, which is empty right now, so let's skip forward. Next to the constructor, there is one method defined, which is the build method. Now, inside this build method, you are going to define the view that you want to use. As you can see right here, you're basically returning a view. So this view, it searches for a folder called view with a file name of name. Now, besides the view, you could also pass in the subject or anything else that you want to show the user. If you have properties that you want to use inside your mailable class, you need to pass them inside your controller. So they will be available inside the template that you're going to create. We won't be doing that in this video, but I will do it later on. There's one thing that is not correct in this file. It returns a view of view.name, but we haven't created that file. Now, in order to create the view ourselves, we could also do that in the CLI. So what we need to do right now is to remove welcome mail. So let's delete it. Move to trash, go back to iTerm, hit the arrow up, and we're indeed going to create a welcome mail, but I want to add a -m flag to it. As you can see in the options menu, -m stands for markdown, and it will create a new markdown template for the mailable. What I usually prefer to do is to create a folder called emails. So let's say space emails, dot, and the dot stands for the folder, like I said before. Inside the emails folder, I want to create the file. So let's call it welcome. Let's hit enter. And you can see that a mail has been created successfully as well. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. We indeed have our welcome mail. Open it. And as you could see in the return markdown, you can see that emails.welcome has been called. We still haven't created a file. But like I said, if we go to resources, views, you can see a new folder called emails, which will refer to emails in the markdown. And if we open it, there's a file called welcome.blade.php, which is basically the welcome after the dot. Let's open it, because this is not the typical blade.php file that we're used to. If we want to open it in the browser, we need to create a new route, because we obviously want to change some stuff up. So let's open web.php. At the bottom, let's create a new row. So let me add a comment, route for mailing. So what I want to do is to basically do the same thing as always. So route, get. Inside the get method, we have a first param, which is the endpoint. So /email. I want to pass in a second param. So let's say comma, which is a function, curly braces, hit enter. And what we need to do inside our route is basically to return a new instance of the welcome mail class that we just created. we're getting an error message because our web.php file does not know where welcome mail comes from. So what we could do is to remove it, say welcome mail. And you can see that the use statement will be automatically pulled in if we click on the option. So let's do that. Let's add parentheses ourselves and a semicolon. And if we go to the top, you can see a use statement of app/mail/welcome mail. If we save it, it should actually work in Google Chrome. So let's go there. Let's change the endpoint to /email. And as you can see, the predefined interface is generated for us and we can see it in the browser since we created it with the -m flag. Now, the most important question is probably, where is this all coming from? Because if we go back to the welcome.blade.php file, we're seeing stuff on the screen that we haven't seen before. As you can see, we're using a hashtag introduction. If we go to Chrome, it's this piece of text right here. So let's change it up. Let's change it to welcome to my authentication and mailing course. Save it, go back to the browser, refresh it, and we just changed that piece of text. What about the paragraph? So what about the body of your message? So let's change that up to, I would like to thank you for watching this video. Save it, Google Chrome, refresh it, and it has been printed out as well. There's also a button right here, which does not look like a clickable button, but it's using a component to mail : button, which we will cover in a second, but it does accept an URL. So what we could do is to basically say https www.codewithdari.com. Change the text to visit site, save it, go back to Chrome, refresh it, and we have a new button right here. Now, what about Laravel right here? You usually don't want to send an email with Laravel in it. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that it's calling a config method and is looking for an app.name. Now, this is searching for the name inside the .env file. So let's open it up. At the top of our screen, you can see app_name, which is equal to Laravel. So let's change it to auth-app. Save it, go back to the browser, and Laravel has been replaced with auth-app. Next to the template that we just created, we can also extend other templates, use sections, parse variables, contain conditional statements. So pretty much anything that you can do in a normal Blade view. What I want to do right now is to send an actual email. We can either set up a mailing provider or a local development. In this video, I want to focus on a mailing provider called Mailtrap. Let's open a new tab in the browser and let's go to mailtrap.io. Let's hit enter. Whenever you want to test your emails before you send it to an actual client, you can use Mailtrap. What it does is basically catching your email in a virtual box so you can text and optimize your email. So what I want you to do is to pause the video, sign up. It's very easy. You can use your Google account, GitHub account, or Office account, or you can just sign in with an email. Pause the video, set up an account, and I will see you back in a second. Whenever you're done with the setup part, you will probably land on the screen that I have on right now. Inside my SMTP settings, we have a section called integrations right here. As you can see, it's on CURL. So if we open the dropdown, you can see a lot of programming languages. Obviously, the one that we need is Laravel 7. So let's click on it. And as you can see, the box right here has been changed and our SMTP data have been printed out. And if you're familiar to the .env file, you can see that this looks pretty much like .env variables. So what we could do is to copy it. And before I continue on, don't copy or use mine because it obviously will be different for you. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let's go right below our mailing. Let's actually replace it. Let's hit backspace, paste it right here, save it. Whenever you want this to work, you need to basically break off your PHP artisan serve and run it again. So let's do that. Let's go to iTerm. Let's go to the PHP artisan serve tab. If you want to break off your serving, you need to press Ctrl+C. And as you can see, we just broke it off. Hit the arrow up, run PHP artisan serve again. Our development server has been started. The application that we got knows, alright, we have a mailing provider called Mailtrap, as they can see right here, so the variable mail_mailer, and it knows how to interact with it with all the different variables. Before we make it work, we need to define where we're going to mail it to. Let's go to the web.php file again. Right inside of our route, we need to add one more line of code. So let's go right above our return instance. Let's say mail. Let's hit enter because we need to pull in the illuminate support vacate mail, colon. Then we need to define the receiver. So let's say to, parentheses, semicolon. Inside the to method, we need to basically pass in a string. And this string will be the email of the receiver. So let's say single quotes, info@darinazar.com. This can be any email that you want to use. The best way to do this is to have the actual user that is logged in, but let's not do that for now. Outside of the to method, we need to add an access operator because we need to define one more method, which is where we want to send it to. So let's say send. And inside the send method, we need to pass in the new welcome mail. Save it. Once again, be aware that you pull in the illuminate mail. Otherwise, you will receive an error. Now let's save this file. Let's go back to Google Chrome. Go to our local host, refresh the page. And as you can see, it takes a bit longer, so something is going on right here. Let's go back to Mailtrap. And as you can see, we have received our first email. This was a very simple example. During the next few videos, I want to show you how you could reset passwords, add attachments, and I will also show you how you could verify your email before you register. Now this was it for this video. In the next video, I want to set up a local development for mailing. If you do enjoy my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. In the last video, I showed you how you could easily set up Mailtrap for mailing. And in this video, I want to show you how you can set up mailing for your local development. Because, well, some of you might not want to set up Mailtrap or use the internet to test mailing. A very cool tool is Laravel's log driver, which will log all the emails that you try to send to your local Laravel file. Before I show you how you could set it up, I want to show you where the log file is located. Inside the root of our application, we need to search for a folder called storage, and usually it's stored at the bottom. Right here. And as you can see, there's a folder called logs in here. So let's open it. And you can see a laravel.log file. Let's open it. The content inside the log file depends on whatever you have done inside your application. If you have a freshly installed application, you probably won't have a log file because you haven't run into errors or done something with it. Just like setting up your mailing to Mailtrap or any other driver, you need to set your mailing to the log file. And this can be done in two different ways, but I will show you the most easiest one. If we open the .env file, you can see that our mail_mailer variable is set to SMTP. If we change it to log, save it, go back to the browser. Now in the last video, we set our mailing in a way that every time the /email endpoint got called, an email will be sent to a specific email. Let's hit enter. Alright, let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's open our Laravel log file. Let's scroll to the bottom. And as you can see right here, you can see that our mail has been printed out, but it also includes the HTML part at the top. But you can also see a section where you just see plain text. There are multiple ways how you could do this, but whenever I want to add an attachment to an email, I usually don't do it inside the web.php file, like we did before, when we defined our route right here, but I use a controller in between. So let's do that as well. Let's navigate to the CLI, and in here we need to perform a command to create a new controller. So let's say php artisan make me a controller called emails controller. Let's hit enter. Our controller has been created, and since we're already here, let's move on and create an email class as well. So let's say php artisan make me a mail called attachment mail. I also want to add a markdown, so a -m flag, and let's also define the file path. So let's say emails.attachment. So inside a folder called emails, and create a file called attachment.blade.php. Alright, let's hit enter. Our mail class has been created successfully. And right now, we need to define the route for our mail because we need to see what we're going to send inside the browser first. So let's go back to the web.php file and let's actually comment out the route that we had. Now right below the route, let's create a new one. So let's say route : get. We're going to add an endpoint to / email. We also want to pass in a second param, so comma, and we're going to pass in an array of the emails controller. Let's hit enter to pull in the entire class at the top right here. Let's add 2 colons, give it a class, comma, and the second param is the method that we want to call. So let's say email. Before we could open it inside the browser, we obviously need to create the email method inside the emails controller. So let's open our emails controller and let's get rid of the comment and let's say public function email. And what we're going to do inside the method is basically defining the logic that we want to send in the email. But before we actually define our email, let's actually return first a new attachment mail, parentheses, let's pull the class in. Let's save it. Let's go back to the browser. Let's change the endpoint to / email. And as you can see, our email has been printed out. Let's take it a step further. Let's go back to the controller. Let's get rid of our return value. Now we're ready to define the logic. So what we want to do is to say mail. Let's pull in the class, : We want to send it to someone, so the to method. Now this method accepts one param, which is the string of the email that's going to receive it. So let's say info@darinazar.com. Now let's attach a new method to it called send. And what we want to send is basically this view that we have. So let's say new attachment mail and let's save it. If we refresh the page inside the browser right now, in order to add an attachment to your mail, you need to do that inside your mail class. So let's open attachment mail. Inside the build method, you can see that the attachment markdown has been defined. Let's add a second method. So let's hit enter and on the line below, let's say subject. Let's say that the subject is how to attach images. A subject is fine, but it's still not why you clicked on the video, because you are interested in how you can upload a file. Now, before I started this recording, I added an image inside my public folder where I created an img folder and an image called test.jpg, just to save us some time with the recording. So pause the video and come back when you have done that as well. So whenever you want to add an attachment, you need to add a new method. So let's hit enter and on the line below, let's say an access operator, and we're going to call the attach method. Now the attach method accepts one param that needs to be filled in. Let's actually do that before I show you the optional param. We need to define the path to our image first. So let's say public_path, which is a method. And inside the method, let's say /img, because the public path will look inside the public folder, / search for a file or an image called test.jpg. Let's save it. Now what I need to do really quick is to go to my .env file, because in the last video I changed it to log. So let's set it back to smtp. Save it. Let's go to the browser. Let's refresh our /email endpoint. As you can see, it takes a second. So what we could do is to open our mail trap, and we already received an image with a subject of how to attach images. Let's click on it. And as you can see in the top right corner, it accepts one attachment. Let's click on it and it's test.jpg. Now, like I said, there is a second param that we can pass in, which is an array. So let's do that. Let's go to Visual Studio Code, to the attach mail, and right after the public path, let's add a comma, let's add brackets, and let's hit enter. In here, you can define things like your MIME type or change the name of your image, because you don't want to send an image or a PDF with the name test. So what we could do is to say as, let's say, test attachment.jpg. Let's add a comma and let's define the MIME, which is equal to application/JPEG. Now, if we save it and go back to Google Chrome, refresh our local host one more time, go back to Mailtrap, you can see that we have received a new email. If we click on it, look at the attachment, you can see that we changed the name of the file. In web applications, a very important topic is notifications. If we imagine an app where we are going to notify students that they are allowed to enroll for a new course, we should look at it as a relational way. One notification will be sent to many students, so we're going to create a one-to-many notification channel. Just like with sending emails, where you perform an artisan command to pull in a PHP mail class, you can do the same exact thing for notifications. So let's navigate to the CLI. In here, we need to create our first notification class. So let's say PHP artisan make me something called a notification. It accepts one argument, which will be the name of your class. Just like anything else in coding, keep it related to the task that you're going to create. So let's call it test enrollment. If we hit enter, a notification folder will be created. So if we go to Visual Studio Code, you can see that inside our app folder, there's a notifications folder with one file, a PHP class called test enrollment. So let's open it. If we take a look at the class, we can see a lot of similarities with the mail class that we created in the last video. But there are a few things different right here. Inside the constructor, we're going to pass in relevant information that you want to send through the notification. If we scroll down, you can see a via method, which accepts one param called notifiable. And what this allows us to do is basically defining which notification channels we're going to use. There's a toMail method right here. And this is an individual method that is being used for every notification channel that allows us to specifically define how to send one of these notifications. Next to the fact that you can send out notifications, you're also able to save them inside a database. We're not going to cover that in this video, but I will show you how you could easily generate a migration that is predefined for you. Let's navigate to the CLI, and in here, let's perform PHP artisan notifications table. This command will generate a migration. Let's hit enter. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. Let's open the last migration, and we have a new schema called notifications. Now, if we close it off and go back to our notification class, so our test enrollment, we're able to set everything up right now. And we can focus on the route and controller after. In order to pass in data inside the constructor, we need to create a new property. So let's do that. Let's say private variable enrollment data. This private property that we have will receive data and it will be passed inside the constructor. So let's do that. Let's say variable enrollment data. Inside the constructor, we could get rid of the comments and say that this enrollment data is equal to the variable that has been passed in. Alright, let's scroll down because inside the toMail method, we're going to change up some things since we're receiving data through the constructor. Now let's get rid of everything that's in the line method. Let's say that we want to print out this enrollment data brackets body. Now let's also get rid of the string inside of the action. Now let's say that we want to print out this enrollment data bracket single quotes enrollment text. We could also replace the URL method right here. So let's do that. And let's say this enrollment data, and we want to pass in the URL. Now as a thank you, we could keep it static, but let's change that up as well. Let's say that this enrollment data, and we want to search for a thank you. And this is pretty much everything that we need. The next step is to set up our route and controller. So let's do that. Let's save the file. We are going to pass in data through the controller. So let's go to the CLI and let's perform a PHP artisan make me a controller called tests enrollment controller. Let's hit enter. Our controller has been created. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and open it. Now our test enrollment controller has been created. But before we do anything, let's define our route first. So let's open our web.php file. Right below all the routes that we have. Let me actually get rid of the auth error because the class hasn't been pulled in. All right. Right at the bottom, let's say that we want to create a new route with a get method. We want the endpoint to be /send-test enrollment. We're also going to pass in a second param because we just created a controller that we want to pass in. So let's add brackets because we're going to pass in two params. The first one is the class name. So we just created tests enrollment controller, : class, comma. single quotes, because we're going to pass in the method. So let's say that the method that we're going to create in a second is called send test notification. Save it, close it off, and we're ready to focus on the core logic inside our controller. So let's open our test enrollment controller. Let's get rid of the comments. Let's create a public function send test notification. Inside the notification class, we define a property called enrollment data that will contain specific data that we want to send to a user. So let's redefine it right here. So let's say variable enrollment data is equal to an array. Let's go inside the array and hit enter. What I usually do is defining the keys first. Since we did that already in the notification class, it must be easy for us right now. The first one is the body. The second one is the enrollment text. Then we got the URL. And the last one was the thank you. We are ready to define the values of our keys. So for the body, let's say you received a new test notification. For the enrollment text, let's say you are allowed to enroll. Now for the URL, let's just keep it equal to the URL method. That will redirect to the / endpoint. And as a thank you, let's say you have 14 days to enroll. Before I continue on with notifying students on their new test enrollment, I want to go over two different ways of sending a notification. Since you can either use the notification facade or use the notifiable trait to an eloquent class, which sends a notification to all users. Now let's start off by doing that. Let's start off with the notifiable trait. By default, every model that you create, so let's open the user model, you will see a use statement at the top right here, which will pull in a notifiable trait that will be used inside the class. This allows us to do something with a user inside the controller. So what we need to do is to pull in the user inside the controller. So right above our array, let's say variable user is equal to user. Let's pull in the user model, colon, first. So get me the first value. Right below the array, we need to send the notification via the trait. And since we're using the notifiable inside the user model, like I just explained, we're going to use the toMail method. Right below our array, let's say that variable user is notifying. What we're going to notify is a new test enrollment, which is the notifications class that we defined. In here, we're going to pass in variable enrollment data, which will be used inside the constructor of the class. Save it. In order to send the mail, we need to go to the browser, obviously. Let's go to Laravel. Let's change the endpoint to /send-test enrollment. Hit enter. We have not defined a front end, so the endpoint will be blank for us. But I, and you probably too, have set up Mailtrap to catch emails. So if we open Mailtrap, you can see that we receive one email called test enrollment, which is a notification for the user. Besides the notifiable trait, there's another way to send emails, and that's through the notification facade. To be honest, I prefer to use the trait, but I will show you the notification facade since it is something you will see a lot on the internet. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's comment out this line right here. And on the line below, we're going to use the notification facade. So let's say notification. Let's pull it in and be aware that you pull in the support facade. Colon, send. The first param is where we're going to send it to. We grabbed up the first user. So let's say variable user, comma. And then we're going to pass in the notification class. So new test enrollment. And in here, we're going to pass in variable enrollment data. Now be aware that you pull in the right use statement. The one that goes to illuminate, support, facades, and then to notification. Let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh our localhost /send-test enrollment. Go to Mailtrap, and we just received a new email. Like I said, both of them have advantages and disadvantages. With the method that we just used, we basically need to pass in the notifiable and the notification. Right here. Which is a little bit extra work. But a huge advantage might be the fact that you could pass in more than one notifiable at the same time. You've probably run into web apps that send you a SMS notification whenever you try to log in. Or think about the delivery company in your country that sends an SMS notification whenever they are near you to drop off a product that you have ordered. There's nothing built into Laravel that does that for you, but you could use a package called Nexmo. And before I continue on, this video is based on the documentation of Laravel and the package that we're going to use called Nexmo. You can easily pull in Nexmo through Composer, but you do need an account later on in order to work with their package, since you need their API credentials. For now, let's navigate to the CLI and perform the composer require Laravel / Nexmo notification channel command. Let's hit enter. And as you can see, the Nexmo notification channel has been pulled in. Nexmo is an API-based application that will connect your application directly to any carrier around the world. With Nexmo, you can do way more than just sending SMS messages. Think about automated Facebook notifications, voice messages, verified transactions, or implemented two-factor authentication. If I could give you my honest opinion, it's very important to get a good understanding of Nexmo, since you will definitely run into it later on in your career. The next step is to publish your vendor directory. So let's say PHP artisan vendor publish. Now you can see a couple options right here of what you want to publish. Now on my screen, number 10 is Nexmo. So let's say number 10, hit enter. So we have copied the nexmo.php file from the vendor and we have placed it in /config /nexmo. So if we open our Nexmo file, let's go to config. You can see a file that has been added right here called nexmo.php. And right here, you can see API key and API secret. This will make sure that it looks inside the env file to find our secret key and name that we're going to add. If it does not exist, it will print out nothing. So let's set up our Nexmo account. Let's go to Google Chrome. Let's open a new tab and go to Google. Right here, let's write down Nexmo. And we need the second link or the first one, Nexmo to developers.nexmo. In the Vonage API developers section, you will see a lot of different notifications that you could use with Nexmo. SMS messages, voice messages, programmable videos, and way more. So what we're going to do is to click on Start Building for free. And what you need to do is to create an account. As you can see, a pretty cool thing is that you don't need credit card requirements, so it's free for everyone. Once you log in, you will get an email that you need to verify before you continue on. So pause the video, set everything up, and I'll see you back on the dashboard. If everything went right for you, you'll be sent to the Nexmo dashboard as you can see on my screen right now. Under the Getting Started tab, you can see an API key and an API secret, which we do need in a second. What we need to do first is we could actually copy our API key, go to Visual Studio Code, open the .env file at the bottom. Alright, let's create a new variable at the bottom of our page called Nexmo_key. And be aware that the name needs to be equal to the name that we're using in our Nexmo.php file, right here. Close it. Let's set it equal to the variable that we just copied. Now let's create Nexmo_secret. I'm not going to show you my API secret key. Copy it, paste it right there, and I'll be back in a second. I've closed off my env file so you can't see it anymore. Now the next step is to create a controller, since we need to have a new endpoint that will send an SMS whenever that endpoint will be hit. Whenever you log in somewhere, you'll be redirected to a new endpoint with a piece of text on your screen which says that you need to verify your account first. So let's navigate to the CLI. We need to create a new controller for our SMS messages. So let's perform a PHP artisan make me a controller called SMS controller. Hit enter. Our controller has been created. We're going to get there in a second to write our logic, but for now we need to define our route first. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's open the web.php file and let's say that we want to route : get. Our first param is the endpoint of the URL. So single quotes / SMS, comma, brackets. We're going to pass in the controller that we just created. So let's say SMS controller, : class, comma, method is called index. Right now, we are ready to work on the logic of our SMS message. We haven't defined a method inside our SMS controller. Let's close off our web.php file. Let's open the SMS controller, create a public function index. And in here, we need to define a couple things. First, we're going to pull in the Nexmo class. So let's write down Nexmo. Let's pull it in the use statement, colon, message. And we're not going to do anything inside the message method, but we're going to create a new method called send. The send method accepts an array. So let's add brackets and hit enter. And be aware that you pull in the Nexmo Laravel vacate Nexmo. Now in here, we need to make sure that we pass in 3 values. Now the first one is called to, which will be the phone number that will receive the SMS. So let's say receiver, comma. The second one is from, so the sender, comma. And the last one is text. Now this will be the text inside the SMS. So let's say test SMS. Just to prevent some issues myself, I won't be adding my phone number since I actually want to keep that private. Right after our Nexmo message, we could basically say echo out a message, send. I will add a screen recording on the screen right now where you see that we received an SMS message. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the country code. So in my country, it's usually +316, where my number starts with. Just get rid of the plus, and that will do the work for you. In the Laravel videos that I created in the past, and especially the project that I've made, we touched on the authentication scaffolding a lot. With the --auth command that we performed at the beginning of this course, we basically pulled in an entire front-end scaffolding. But there are a lot of things that you need or can adjust in order to make it a working login and registration system. On a lot of web apps on the internet, you usually don't get access to the data right after registration, since there's always a verification attached to it. Now the email verification does not work right off the bat, since you need to make some adjustments to make it work. Now if we navigate to our controllers, you can see an auth folder right here. So let's open it with a verification controller. This controller handles email verification for users that create a new account. Inside the user model that we have, we need to implement the verification class. You can see that the user class extends authenticatable, and we also need to say that it implements the must verify email. Save it. We're not done yet, but we are done inside the model. Close it off. The next step is telling the route that the user needs to be verified before they can proceed. So let's open the web.php file. Right here, you can see that we have the auth : routes. In order to tell the routes that verification needs to be enabled, we need to pass an array inside a method. Verify, which is an array, and let's say we want to set that equal to true. So we're enabling verification. Save it. There's one more step left right here. Whenever you do anything related to authentication, you pull in the middleware in your controller. Let's open it. Let's open the home controller. Let's open it. You can see that this middleware is using the auth. Let's remove it. Let's pass in an array instead because we need to pass in 2 values. The first one is auth again, comma, and the second one is verified. This is all you need to do in order to add verification. Now the last thing that we need to do is to test it out. I'm using Mailtrap to catch my emails so I can navigate to the register page. I already have it open. Now the name is Dari. My email is info@darinazar.com. My password is something secret. And my confirmed password is also something secret equal to my password. Click on register. It's taking a second. Alright. As you can see, we're being hit with a screen that we haven't seen before because we need to verify our email. Let's open Mailtrap. We have a new email. And right here, you can see that we have an email with a button called Verify Email Address. And before we click on the button, you can see a URI right here, which has a verified token inside of it. So let's copy the link. Let's replace it with Mailtrap. And as you can see, we have verified our account and we are logged in. This was it for this video where we verified our email after registration. If you do like my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button.